Okay, so we're going to talk in this section, continue learning about or reviewing the unit circle and its relation to degrees, radians, and the ordered pairs around the circle. Now I hope that you are taking the time to memorize this unit circle, complete with the degree values, the radian values, as well as the ordered pairs, because that is really what the rest of our trig is, or all of our trig is kind of hinging on. So make sure that you're memorizing these degree values along with the radian values and their corresponding ordered pairs. So let's take a second and talk a little bit further about the unit circle that we have here. It's actually a really great tool for us. So we are trying to take the time to memorize these ordered pairs on the outside. We know that a point on this circle, this point represented here, is given by an ordered pair where we have both an x and a y coordinate. We also know from our last section that if I were to take this point, if I was to take this point, I know that if I slide that point from its originating position up here 30 degrees, then this part that I've highlighted in yellow would be the arc length, right? We also know that the arc length is equal to theta times the radius. Okay, so give me just a second. I'm trying to relate all of this together for you. Now let's also suppose that I have a unit circle where the radius is 1, which is what we've drawn here, right? We know we have a circle with a radius of 1. So if we let r be equal to 1, then according to the arc length, S, the length of the arc, has to be equal to theta times the radius of 1, or in other words, the arc length is the same as the measurement of theta. Okay? So in other words, this value right here, this arc length, okay, would be pi over 6, because that is the radian measure of this angle generated by shifting this point along that yellow line. Okay, so we're going to relate this a little bit further. Now, going back to our unit circle, or going back to this value of pi over 6, right? If I wanted to know what the sine of pi over 6 was, okay, if I wanted to know what the sine of pi over 6 was, and I didn't have this handy dandy little unit circle, instead I knew I could make a triangle. So going back to what we learned in the previous chapter on triangles, let's draw us a 30-degree triangle for a second. If this is 30 degrees, then I know the side opposite 30 degrees is 1, the base over here is the square root of 3, and the hypotenuse is 2. So just from the triangle, not the unit circle, just from the triangle, if I wanted to know what the sine of pi over 6 was, which is the same thing as the sine of 30, I know that sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So I know that the sine of pi over 6 has to be 1/2. And I can say that the cosine of pi over 6, which is adjacent over hypotenuse, would be the square root of 3 over 2. Now let's refer back, okay? So I now know that I have these two values right here for pi over 6. Going back to the unit circle, if I'm at pi over 6, recognize that those two values from that ordered pair are the same function values that I got when just looking at the triangle and taking pi over 6. Okay, so these two are related, in other words. What we're finding out just by looking at this is a lot of things. We realize, hopefully, that when I'm looking at the ordered pair on the unit circle, I'm actually, or another way I can look at that, is the first value gives me the cosine of my angle. The second value gives me the sine of my angle. Relating that to angles and arc lengths, remember that the radian value of this theta and the arc length are both the same thing. So in other words, if I take the cosine of the arc length and the sine of the arc length, right? Or the cosine of the arc length and the sine of the arc length, that's what I'm getting from these ordered pairs. Okay, so hopefully you're relating all of that together with the unit circle we have, how that relates to the arc length from the previous section, you know, how it's all kind of tying together, because it's all really important. So, and the other thing I want to point out before we move on is as you're working on memorizing this, realize that this first quadrant right here is really just symmetric and reflected all the way around the unit circle. So if you can remember and memorize the first quadrant over here, then because you know that this first quadrant is reflected across the y-axis over here, you can repeat not only the ordered pair values, okay, well, you can repeat the ordered pair values, and then you can also hopefully do a little mental math with your fractions to come up with the radian values, and then using our information that we learned from chapter 1, we can come up with these angle values as well.